Welcome to Slayer the Alchemist, and on today's episode, why when a band re-records a classic album, it's almost always a bad idea. What we're talking about here is when a band goes back to a classic record and they go into the studio and redo all the songs. What got me thinking about this topic is Roger Waters. I don't know if it's out yet or what the deal is, but he's redoing, re-recording Dark Side of the Moon. This is different than a remix or a remaster. I did a video on remixes and remasters, what they are and the differences between them. I'll leave that linked below in the description. This is different than that. Other bands have done this. Twisted Sister did it with Stay Hungry. I think they called it Still Hungry. Exodus did it with Bonded by Blood. I can't remember what they retitled that. Man of War, believe did it with their first album. So it's something that some bands do. And you may say, why would they do this? All right. Part of it, a lot of times, is motivated by money. And the artist may have signed a contract where the money made from the album sales, the physical sales, they don't get any of it, or they get next to nothing from it. So to get around that, the artist re-records the whole album, and then they put it out again, thinking that now we're going to get a bigger cut of the money that comes in for this album. The artist may also do it reasoning that, when we did it originally, the recording technology wasn't that great, or it didn't sound that good, we weren't happy with it. Now we have a chance to go back in and redo it the way that we want to do it. I believe Roger's motivations, I read something where he said, I really wrote all of Dark Side of the Moon, so I'm guessing that, I don't know, but I'm guessing that that's probably a motivation for him to try to take writing credit for all the songs. I don't know how he's going to be able to do that, but I'm guessing that there's a financial reason why he's doing this. Now, we're not talking about in a live situation where a band may play an entire album and add or subtract some things from it, or do versions of songs live that are different. This is a studio recording, a re-recording of a classic album, and why this is almost always in my case, it's always a bad idea, but I'm saying almost because maybe there's some album out there that I haven't heard where this actually works. In my opinion, this never works, and it never works because, and what got me thinking of this was I was just listening to Roger Waters' new version of Money. And I also saw a video about movies, older movies that used to use what's called a matte painting. Now, I'm not a movie person, so this is just how I interpret these things. These are paintings that a lot of times served as like a backdrop, like it would look like a city or a sky, the sky or something like that. And there would be real actors, but they would use these matte paintings as backdrops to make things look bigger. Movies from the 50s and 60s used this all the time. This particular article was talking about the movie Spartacus from, I don't know when that was, 1960, I think. Movies like that, The Ten Commandments, Ben-Hur. That's how they made these scenes look so massive in these big cities and towers and stuff like that. Star Wars did it too. Would use matte paintings to fill out backgrounds. And a lot of these movies also used miniatures. In Star Wars, they used miniatures that they moved around. And the article was saying about how, if this was today, computers and CGI and everything like that, they would do it all with CGI. And it was talking about how, they should redo some of these movies and use CGI instead of these matte paintings. And I thought that is a terrible idea. And it made me think of these albums being re-recorded. And again, the reason why it's a terrible idea is because we have lived with these classic albums for so long, just like these movies. Part of the charm of these movies is the way they were filmed, the way they had to use the limited technology they had at the time to make these movies, whether it's using miniatures, dolls, animatronic things, the matte paintings, all this stuff. And we've seen these movies so many times, movies like Star Wars, we've seen it so many times that even though by today's standards it may be primitive, we love it for what it is. And to go back and change it would feel wrong. It wouldn't feel right. It wouldn't feel the same. And with these recordings, it's the same way. How many times have we heard Dark Side of the Moon? If you're a fan of Pink Floyd, like millions of times, right? Even if you're not a fan of Pink Floyd, you probably heard the album millions of times. So we've lived with these albums for so long. And even though they might be, quote, flawed in some ways, just like these early movies don't have the same level of sophistication as far as effects and graphics like you would have in today's movies, we're okay with that. And in fact, that's what makes these movies and these older recordings charming. The vibe, the atmosphere, use whatever word you want. These older albums tend to have this, and to replace that with modern technology, it never works. It never feels the same. And when you've listened to an album a lot, a whole bunch of hundreds, thousands of times, to have it changed, even if it's, quote, for the better, it doesn't sound right, because to our ears, we're used to hearing it the way that it is. Another example of this is anytime I watch The Godfather, I always marvel at how dimly lit that movie is, how there's so many scenes like them sitting around in a room talking, or just in general, that it's so dark. And by today's standards, they probably wouldn't do that. And if they reshot that or re-edited it, they'd probably brighten it up, but then it wouldn't feel the same. It would change the original feel of the movie. Another example using movies is The Warriors. I love that movie. They did some kind of redo of it where the director originally wanted there to be like, to make it look like a comic book or something. I don't, because it's terrible. I've never watched it. So they redid it and they cut in these like comic book panels. It just looks terrible. It ruins the flow of the movie. Now the director is thinking, this is the way I originally wanted it. And maybe if it had come out and I lived with it for all these years like that, maybe I would have accepted it. But when you've lived with it the other way for so long, it doesn't feel right. And to the viewer, the fan, it doesn't matter to us like, well, okay, back then when you recorded this album, you really wanted the song order to be this way, or you really wanted it to be mixed this way. That doesn't matter to us. We've lived with it now. We like these albums. Usually these albums that they're doing this with are successful albums, classic albums like Dark Side of the Moon. I mean, that's one of the biggest selling albums of all time. So clearly whatever they did with the original worked. It doesn't need a redo. It doesn't need a re-recording. It just doesn't work. Maybe I'm jumping the gun. I've only heard Roger's version of the song Money, which I didn't like. It sort of drags along. He make Rodgers like barely singing. He's kind of speaking through it. And it doesn't work because as you're hearing it, you're just thinking of the original. Going back to movies, there's times when people redo classic movies. It almost never works because you're remembering the classic movie in your mind. And even if the new one has better graphics and better this and better that, it never works. All right, so that's my thought on bands redoing classic albums. Let me know what you think of the whole thing. Let me know if you've heard Roger Waters and his new version of Money. Let me know what you think of it. Let me know, are there any times where bands have gone in and re-recorded a classic album and you liked it? Let me know in the description down below because I'd like to check it out. It's never worked. It's never worked for me for all the reasons that I listed here. Maybe if you're somebody that's never heard Dark Side of the Moon before and you pick up Roger Waters' version, maybe that will have some sort of, and you listen to that. You only listen to that for a long time, and then maybe hearing the original would sound strange to you. I don't know. So maybe it's all perspective where you come in to these things. But let me know what you think of the whole thing down in the comments down below. Till we see you again, make sure you rock hard, ride free.